and welcome to my Steamvaults Heroic Guide for the Eyes of a Warrior Tank. Now before we begin the tour, some recommendations regarding the competition. I would suggest going with an Enhancement Shaman for the buffs and the totems, most importantly the Tremor Totem, because there are mobs that fear. I would also go with a Paladin. Rep Paladin is perfectly fine. This is for salvation. I would choose the Priest Healer here because of the spell for the first boss, Dispelling Fears. But most importantly for me is the Prayer of Mending, because that helps me with Fret. And then I would recommend for the last slots to go with a Rogue. Rogue because it provides 1 CC and it also synergizes with the rest of the party. I wouldn't recommend going with more than 1 melee DPS because there's a lot of AoE mobs at close range. But as you can see, my composition for this run doesn't tick all of those boxes. We have the Rep Paladin for salvation, we have the Enhancement Shaman, we have the Priest, but we do have a Feral Druid. So we have 4 melee characters and no CC. But here we are, and despite that, it's one of the most clean, quickest runs and enjoyable runs I've had whilst playing TBC. So let's get on with the tour. So yeah, Steamvaults is one of the easiest heroics. So if you're just dipping your toes in and you're very new, you're not so great geared, this would be one of the ones I would recommend doing early. The packs don't hit particularly hard, the bosses don't hit particularly hard, and if you have the right classes, the problems that come up in this dungeon can be dealt with a lot easier. Like with the Shaman, with the Priest, for example. So the warrior mobs in this dungeon are kind of low priority. They don't do a lot of damage, they don't do any CC, so they're kind of meh. No threat to you really. However, the Sirens are a threat. They don't do a lot of damage, but the thing that makes them fearful is the fear. And this is why we do carry a Shaman in the party, and the Priest Fear Ward is very helpful as well. So what I like to do with Sirens, if they're part of a pack, I like to focus them down first, and or you can crowd control them, but I prefer to kill them first because they are squishy. The Bulk Overlords, they do a lot of damage, single target, and they do AoE damage as well, so you really want to get your debuffs down on these guys. They can put a disease on you, and if you're a gnome, you can remove the disease by using your racial. I kind of got lazy here, and I'm kind of griefing the group by tanking him here. I simply just have no excuse other than I just couldn't be asked to say to the group, just wait and pull him back. Because now what we're having to deal with is, the healer's having to deal with, is line of sight with all the bumps and a lot of AoE healing because we're all close together. So that's very much griefing on my part. For this pack, it's a little bit tricky, and you'll see why you don't want so many melee party members now. And that's because the engineers throw bombs, which do a lot of AoE damage close up. So, coming across a pack like this, I would recommend, again, killing the caster first, and then CCing one of the engineers. But the kill order is like the squishy caster first, then the damage dealer and the engineer, and then the warriors will come in last. So the Myrmidons are quite threatening, not to you per se, but they are to your melee DPS. And they can be a little bit tricky to heal for your healer, because the sweeping strikes can hit randomly. You can nullify that with your disarm though. The priest is doing a really good job. They're doing a really good job by giving me Prayer of Mending at the start of each pull, which helps me out a hell of a lot. You'll be noticing like a few things that I kind of do. Like, I do tend to carry a lot of rage into new packs. This is called pooling your rage. You really want to be doing this because, well, for me it relieves a lot of anxiety. Like, if I have 0 rage going into a pack and I know I got bloodthirsty DPS with me, it's certainly a lot better to have a lot more rage to work with. Output that threat a lot easier. So there's a number of ways that you can pull your rage. Is like for example, here, if like our threat is such a long way ahead of the DPS, you don't need to continue putting rage into those mobs. You can simply just hold them back. That's one way of pulling rage. You can pull rage by killing critters. You can pull rage by using your blood rage whilst you're moving to the next pack. There's numerous different ways of keeping your rage high. So with that pack that we just did, I'd always recommend using a line of sight spot because there's 2 casters there. And again, it was just prioritizing the sirens first, or CCing one of the sirens. Again, squishy mob, removing the big threats, and then working around the other mobs. This pack is actually quite tricky also, because of where they kind of patrol. We tank them in a really, really good spot here, because we won't get feared down to that pack and we won't get feared into the boss. So it's just reducing the risk of each pull, and we did a really good job there. So we positioned them well. If things went to shit, we have Fear Ward, we have Priest Dispel, and we also have the Tremor Totem. So it's very low chance that things will go badly for us. This boss, there isn't really too much to say. The difficulty is with the ads, but once the ads are gone, it's a piece of cake. Again, if you can CC one of the ads, do so. If not, kill them, control them, kill them. And then for this latter part of the fight, it's just dealing with and moving away from the lightning clouds and dispelling the stuns. But apart from that, it's very difficult to screw this fight up, honestly, once you deal with the ads at the beginning. just something that I thought of, because this dungeon is one of the easier ones and the mobs don't hit too hard. For this dungeon, like, I've run like full fret gear, like I've run as many fret pieces as I can, and I would also kind of segue into the fret with the shouts that you decide to use. So throughout this entire dungeon, you can use battle shout quite comfortably, I would say. Only times I have really look at like commanding shouts is if like there's more benefit to the group having more HP for a section, but this just doesn't really apply to this dungeon. The only other time I would use commanding shout is like a lot of hard hitting mobs and you need the HP. But if that doesn't apply, getting additional fret, because that is something that warriors do struggle with. They do struggle with, but also DPS are, for the large part, very impatient. So you need as much fret as you can get just to stay ahead slightly. But for this run, like, our fret has been amazing. The group has been really, really good in following the target. Salvation's helped out a ton. The priest has helped out a ton with prayer of mending. Like, fret has just been such a non-issue with this group. And it's also just making it easier for yourself. Like, once you get into a rotation of, okay, so I've not mentioned this yet, but like, you may have already picked up on the fact that with Skull, the first thing that I like to do is concuss. So that's like, what's that, 5 seconds of the mob being stunned. And then it just allows the DPS to go ham on that mob whilst you build threat on the other mobs. And then once the stun falls, you can taunt. And then you can decide whether you need to put more threat into that mob, or if your DPS will kill the mob fairly quickly, so you don't need to concern yourself with that mob anymore. So you can see here, there's 2 mobs with the sweeping strikes. Up is a little bit risky. Yeah, good, like disarm, that's a good thing. For the double myrmidons, again, I just recommend CCing one of them. So you get into a patch in here, stun the mob, do threat to the other mob, come back to taunts. For these packs, the slaves get attached to the slave master, but they run away as soon as the slave master dies. Some of them are slightly bugged. There is a little trick with this guy. Like, you shouldn't, like, the druid ends up pulling here, he shouldn't. It kind of fucks things up a little bit. But I was purposely waiting to pull him at a certain time so that we wouldn't get any slaves. So if we were to pull him in the middle of this tunnel here, he wouldn't pull any slaves with him, so it would just make things a little bit easier. The slave masters and the slaves are kind of, I don't fully understand it. They're just, the threat drop is really weird. Like, it just seems to just drop randomly. So these are a little bit sketchy. And also they're super annoying because of disarm. Don't underestimate these mobs, by the way. Especially when it's a double pack, they do a hell of a lot of damage and it can be really overwhelming for the healer. But despite that, I'm still trying to pull rage at some point, like towards the end of the fight. Yeah, so sort of at this point, I'm kind of thinking about pulling rage. It's just a fine balance with tanking. It's a fine balance. It's like you don't want to blow too much of your rage, but you don't want to go at 100 because then obviously you're wasting your rage as well. And it kind of brings me to another point. It's like the heroic strikes and the cleaves. It's you kind of want to use them when it's not going to deny you from using revenge, shield slam, shield block. So you gotta be a little bit sparing with it and smart with it. It just takes time. So like right now wouldn't be a bad time to say use a cleave at like 50 rage. And then if I'm at like 20 rage and I'm not getting any rage, then I'm gonna just absolutely not touch those buttons. But for this fight, there isn't too much to say. It's mostly just a tank and spank fight. Only the little additions for you to think about is to thunderclap to interrupt the healing effects from the little mobs. So that's one thing that you have to do, but we had a red paladin helping us out there with that, which is good. And also managing your rage, because it was a fight that you don't actually get too much rage from. So it's a case of like maintaining enough threat on the boss and then just doing your little bit on the ads just to keep them interested. So again, just trying to carry over a little bit more rage into the next pack. But yeah, like I said, this run was really nice. Some good DPS, and yeah, just really cooperative. So yeah, not very often you come across this. So this pull, again, same thing. Stun the caster mob, come back round to taunted, build threat on other mobs. I'd highly recommend marking as well. So what I've got is a macro that explains what mark is for what, kill order. I'd recommend doing that at the beginning. And it just makes everybody's life easier. For a DPS player, like, it's just good to know. It's good to know so I can DPS quicker. For a tank, it makes holding aggro on mobs a lot easier because the DPS know where to put the threat. Doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to follow it, but that's how it's supposed to work anyway. Another little tip: Berserker Rage before the pull. If you're on 0 rage, it just allows you to generate a little bit more rage. Obviously, if you're pulling rage over time, it's not something that you're going to do, but when you're at 0 rage, something I highly recommend doing. So that was the last pack. We don't have to kill the pack on the left, but you can just skip along the right hand side. So for this boss, you want to tank the boss next to the tanks. What he'll do is he'll open one of the tanks. You have a time limit to kill it. You have to kill it. If you don't kill it, it enrages, which means you're going to die. So your DPS have to kill it. You want to tank next to it so we can cleave. Apart from that, it's just a general tank and spank. The boss doesn't do a lot of damage to you. And I hope that Devil Shark's cape drops for you, because it's one of the best capes, if not the best cape for phase 1. So yeah, that's pretty much Steamvaults heroic. Not too difficult, right? But yeah, I hope this was helpful for you guys. Hope this was helpful. If you do have any questions, feel free to leave them down below. I will throw in some more tips and whatever I can think off the top of my head when I do other sort of guides for these dungeons. So keep your eyes peeled for that, and maybe there'll be some decent wisdom in those videos for you. But until then, thanks for watching, and see you guys in the next one.